Amortality is a word that I coined to describe a phenomenon that I saw very clearly around me. We don't really age the same way we used to. Now, I'm not talking about resisting age, though that may come into it. We are actually going through fewer stages of life. We are, in a way, continuing on very much the same way from our teens right the way into older age. And the moment you notice that, you realise it's true. The moment you start thinking about amortality, you think about the people you know, you think about your parents, you think about your grandparents, and you see that people are not old as they used to be. Some people are, but there are a lot of people who aren't, and there are increasing numbers who aren't. You see that people are continuing to do things at ages that would have seemed improbable before. I know a lot of people who get married for the first time in their 40s, for example, their 50s, who start families at that kind of age. People are just doing things later. And the moment you notice that, you realise that what's also happening is an elision. You might think that because we're living longer, you would fit in more ages and stages of life. In fact, what's happening is that we are fitting in fewer because all of these ages and stages are eliding. As soon as you notice that, you start wondering why. Why is this happening? And there are some obvious things. I mentioned that there are technologies that enable us, if not to live longer, at least to live more healthily, possibly to look younger. But there are also scientists telling us, a lot of scientists telling us, that it will be possible to live longer, that our lifespan has already extended by about 30 years since the beginning of the 20th century, and that in fact such radical extension of life is possible, is just around the corner. But we hear these voices saying to us, age is a relative thing, age is kind of how you choose it to be. And we start to believe them. Probably Mick Jagger has to be one of the archetypal amortals. Simon Cowell also, to me, is a classic amortal. And it's not just, what I would like to make clear is that this is not just about Peter Pan syndrome. This is not just about people wanting to remain eternally young. There are all sorts of things about the way those two men are, which really are characteristic of amortals, whether they're people who are physically attempting to stay young. Both of them are incredibly active people. They are forever finding new things to do and keeping themselves busy. And one of the interesting things is why amortals tend to be that busy, is that if you have given up on the idea that life is about moving through these defined stages, then that at some point you will start lapsing into a kind of mellow old age and then sort of gently fall down the slope towards death. And if you're actually, to a certain extent, flinching away from that idea, one of the things that you do is that you fill your time. The thing about amortality is it's much easier to spot in older people, but actually amortality affects people right the way through life. One of the things that I noticed when I was researching this book is, in fact, a kind of rush to get older. I mean, people talk about children becoming prematurely sexualized, for example, or dressing older than they are, or also taking on certain kinds of responsibilities. In fact, the opposite problem is also true, that children don't leave home anymore, that often for economic reasons, but also because the generation differences are no longer as they were. They don't feel the need to define themselves by leaving home. So those are both issues affecting younger people. There's also a question of when, for example, you might think of having children. It used to be that people would think that they possibly would look at getting married in their 20s and starting a family then. Increasingly, women are leaving it into their 30s or even later to start families because they assume that they can. And there are technologies, ever more technologies, to help them to do so. But that is also a form of immortality. It's this idea you can do anything you like at any point in your life. You can you can start a family, you can start a business, you can find a completely new way of living at any point. Young people do it, old people do it. As I say, much easier to spot it in older people. The problem at the moment is that although we've gained the extra time, the extra 30 years, and the fastest growing segment of the world's population are centenarians, a lot of us end up doomed to living a lot of those years in various states of decay and discomfort. So to me, what really is hopeful, both about what I discovered in terms of the science, but also the potential for immortality to be a force for good, is that if you stay active, that is to say mentally and physically active for as long as possible, as immortals have a tendency to do, that in itself is a recipe for living for experiencing a longer health span. So living more of your life vibrantly.